Parents, the following program is intended for people over the age of 13. If your kids are younger than that, please use the YouTube Kids app.
Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Peter Bernard's Scary Stories for Adults.
Welcome to Scary Stories NYC. I'm the old dude bringing you 3 never-before-heard and allegedly true Dogman stories taken from the secret diaries I've managed to acquire. Today's executive producer is Adam Friday in the UK. Thanks, Adam. We literally couldn't be doing this without your contributions and the contributions of everyone in the paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Join today, won't you? Be like Adam Friday. I think all Dogman stories are scary. Even the least scary ones are still more frightening than 98% of stories about other animals. But once in a while, there comes a Dogman story so frightening that it scared the storyteller himself into the hospital. This is just such a tale, which is why we call it Dogman Scared the Living Daylights Out of Me. Dear Scary Stories NYC, this happened back in the late 1960s when I was 20 years old. I was a hippie back then, and I felt I had found a new and deep friendship with the world of plant life. So to celebrate this friendship, on this particular day, I walked to the park in Cedar Grove, New Jersey. I took off my shoes, and I walked on the grass barefoot and into the forested area in the park. It was, as I recall, a beautiful day, and I laid down on the grass with my head between 2 bushes. I decided I was going to try to listen to the thoughts of the bushes, because that's what 20-year-olds were into back then, okay? I fell asleep, and I woke up not to the thoughts and ideas of plant life, but to the creepy, tickling feeling of a centipede trying to climb into one of my ears. As I brushed it away, I noticed a black dog had crawled under the bush to my right and had its head lying on the ground next to me. The dog was looking at me sort of curiously, looking a little worried, I guess. His expression made me laugh, and I reached out to pet him. I barely drew my fingers back in time as the dog snapped at them, growling. It quickly pulled back and up, standing on all 4s, then, shockingly, pulling immediately back on its hind legs, barking fiercely, snarling, foaming at the mouth, and making a whining sound that was even more frightening than any of the rest of it. I was on my back, on the ground, looking straight up and up. The dog must have been close to 6 feet tall as it stood bipedally. I know you tell stories about creatures much taller than that, but you'll have to believe me that 6 feet of enraged canine while you're in a vulnerable position can be pretty scary. I wanted to get up and run, but I kept imagining the different parts of me I would leave open for attack, no matter which escape route I chose. I did manage to get back up onto my own 2 legs, and I backed away slowly. It amazed me how long the dog had managed to stand there on his hind legs, as I really was still thinking that I was just dealing with a normal, if angry and ill-tempered, canine. The dog seemed far more well-balanced than I had ever seen a dog before when it was balancing up like that. It didn't even look like balancing. It looked as though this were its normal way to stand. It was then that I noticed the paws and claws on the creature were very hand-like, and that its front legs were more like the arms of a human than they were like anything that was supposed to be living in that park. In spite of the fact that I had perceived this as being merely a dog, and nothing else but a dog, as I stood there looking at it standing there and looking back at me, I noticed that the proportions were all wrong. It made me feel queasy, like I was seeing life through a funhouse mirror, all distorted. But only the dog was distorted, not the forest. The dog was not normal. It was like a hallucination, but I could hear it breathing. I could see its fangs, and I could watch it drool. It sure seemed real, and it sure seemed dangerous. I tried to back away a little more quickly, as I remember hyperventilating and feeling very unwell suddenly. The creature was easily able to walk toward me in a bipedal fashion. However many steps I took backwards, it took half as many forwards and made up the same ground. This was not a dog. This was a monster. You can decide if this 6-foot-tall dog-headed man with dark black fur, long floppy ears, intense black eyes, with teeth and claws created to enjoy the carnivore diet, was a dogman, or a werewolf, or a skinwalker, or a rougarou, or the Toxic Avenger for all I care. I can't tell you because my stream of data on the subject ends right there. I woke up in the hospital and they told me it was 6 days later. Either they have faked all the calendars ever since then, or else they were telling me the truth. According to them, I had been in a sort of coma brought on by a state of shock. In other words, to put it bluntly, Dogman scared the living daylights out of me. We have another story of Dogman coming up and smelling a sleeping person later in this program. But first, here's a story of a fairly urban dogman, and it's also from New Jersey. And we've got that story right after this.
You know what time is coming soon, don't you? The day of the wearing of the green skin. I'm inviting you to me St. Patrick's Day Dogman Party. The one and only Dr. Death St. Patrick's Day Scary Story Special. An extra long episode, and only us ghouls and ghosts and deceased individuals are invited. Oh, all right. You seem cool. You can come too. It all happens here on the Scary Stories NYC channel, Tuesday, March 17th. Feel free to arrive early. All my other guests are late.
Dogman, living in the warehouse basement. Dear Scary Stories NYC. Back in the late 1980s, I worked for a company that was taking an old warehouse building and renovating it into luxury housing. They had done this with some other old warehouses before contacting me about this project, as the people they had worked with up till then had turned down this particular gig. I was wondering what it could be, and I was a bit nervous already, but I was at a point in my life where I couldn't afford to ever turn down any job. So my small company was being hired to clean out the warehouse, most particularly the basement, which had, quote, reverted to nature, unquote. It was literally a rat's nest, as the place was completely infested with the large, disease-carrying rodents. We hated those jobs, but we had done some of them before. If you know what you're doing, you'll survive, and the rats won't. But that got me to thinking. I'm sure the company that these guys normally hired would have dealt with rat infestations before too. It didn't seem a reason to quit a good paying gig. Well, a decent paying gig anyway. I had the feeling there must be something more to this than just the rats, so I decided to proceed slowly and carefully with every step of this process. I was with a team of 3 of my men, all wearing face masks and clear plastic goggles, proceeding to inspect every last room of the basement. We were not there to do anything except look at it, then get back upstairs alive to plan out how to exterminate and clean up. When we discovered there was a sub-basement that the owner hadn't told us about, we made a spot decision to go ahead and inspect it right away by ourselves. We had no idea what we were walking down into, and we almost lived to regret this very foolish and impatient decision. On the way down the windy old concrete staircase, 2 of the guys were joking around. Normally, I like it when everyone's spirits are up, but this didn't seem to be the right moment for it. After all, we might be about to find out why the previous team had quit. Maybe we should be quiet, and maybe we should be paying attention. I made both suggestions to the men, and they responded professionally. As the staircase wound round and round and round, we continued our descent. All I could hear was the echoing sound of our boots on the concrete and the sound of my heart beating in my ears. Something about this whole thing had me feeling a very deep kind of fear, and I knew that we should abort and get back upstairs. I knew we should, but I knew we weren't going to actually do that. When we reached the bottom of the claustrophobic stairwell, there was one thick-looking metal door to go through. It was not locked, and we went right through, discovering that we were now in a very, very large, square or rectangular room, painted black, and with only the lights of our flashlights present, same as the floor above had been. But while the floor above had been a labyrinth of hallways and rooms, this one was one immense parking lot kind of a space. Just black walls, ceiling and floor, and garbage strewn everywhere. I noticed that along one of the far walls, there was a stream, a literal waterway flowing through. As I approached it, I noticed fungi growing along the edges. "It's like its own ecosystem down here," one of the guys said, but I was already wondering if that water was from a natural stream that had leaked into here, or if that water was coming from a pipeline that should have been directed elsewhere. I knew we were going to have to figure that out, and I knew we were going to have to fix it too. As I was inspecting the running water and mushrooms, I heard the guys shouting behind me. I turned to see horrified expressions on their faces like I had never seen before. They ran before my mind had made sense of their shouting, and before my eyes had focused on the source of their horror. There, all the way across on the other side of that parking lot-sized floor, I heard the sound of something moving. I aimed my flashlight at the sound, and my eyes got to see the same thing that had sent 3 grown men running for their lives like school children. I saw, rising from a prone position to a bipedal standing one, a kind of a Bigfoot monster, but one with a very wolf-like snout. Its ears were very wolf-like as well, and it was colored gray all over. It wasn't a uniform color of gray, but a mixture of shades that it blended together to form its own new shade. Its eyes reflected back the light from my flashlight. It was an animal, because human eyes don't reflect back light in that manner. But other than its head, it really did look like a hairy or a furry man. At least, it looked more like a man than anything else. That's why I was saying that it was an awful lot like a Bigfoot. A skinny Bigfoot with a wolf head. I started heading toward the exit that my workers had already left through, but I wasn't running like they had. I wanted to get as long a look at this creature as I could. I was still thinking that it was my job to exterminate all the vermin in that building. So to me at that moment, it was just about me doing my job. I had to understand that thing so I could get it out of my client's sub-basement. I was alarmed, and I was on guard, but I would not say I was scared like my men. Not yet, that is. As I strolled toward the exit, watching the creature emerging from behind boxes and bags of garbage, I was stunned to see just how large it actually was. It was taller than any man, and the way it moved gave the impression of a feral sort of intelligence that went with its savage speed and agility. When the thing stood up to its full height, the ears on top of its head brushed some dust off the ceiling above it. Then the dog bent down, its fur rising in fear and anger. It bared its fangs, and it barked loudly at me. I was so surprised to see the dog run at me on its hind legs that I just stood there, my jaw hitting the floor, in full amazement, watching it come on. But it had made it halfway across the garage in only 3 or 4 steps, and it was now all I could do to get out of that exit door and back into the stairwell before the dogman was on me. He tried to pull the door open, and while he struggled, I made it out of the building with my men. Needless to say, we were the second company to have to turn down that gig. The place did open as a luxury condo building a few years after that, so I know that they eventually figured out the problem somehow. I almost don't want to know what they had to do to clean that up. I imagine it must have gotten pretty ugly. But what else can you expect when there's a dogman living in the warehouse basement? Hey Alicia, did you see that Jim Steranko is appearing at the Northeast Comic-Con?
I did not know that.
Yeah, plus the amazing Kreskin.
Oh my god, that's so like Festina Raidering, yo.
Plus, from the 1970s, it's John Davidson.
Gasp.
The guy from Buffy.
Badass.
The cop from Mr. Rogers.
Badasserer.
The blue chick from the TV show.
Badasserest.
And of course, it's all hosted by Gary Summers, the king of pop culture.
We hear it for Gary Summoners and stuff.
All this and more, March 13th through 15th.
OMG.
At the Boxborough Regency in Massachusetts.
Yay!
Right next door to my home, Wolf Swamp. The dogman who smelled my face. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I was sleeping in a sleeping bag with no tent under the stars in the Catherine Walter Wilderness area in Wisconsin. I like to sleep without a tent under the stars, or I used to. Anyway, I kind of got scared away from the practice by the dogman who smelled my face. I used to often have very deep dreams on the nights that I would sleep with no roof between me and the stars. On this particular night, those dreams were nightmares. I dreamed of faces, hideous and evil-seeming faces, glaring at me, laughing at me, mocking me, tormenting me. All of the faces were large and too close, but I couldn't get away from them. I was unable to back up. I saw them coming closer, and I felt backed up against a wall. I could feel them touching my face. It was a horrible feeling, so cold and clammy, and I was unable to get away. And then I realized I'd been dreaming, so I opened my eyes. What I saw there in front of me was so horrible, so absolutely the last thing you want to see when waking up, that I closed my eyes right back up again. Because what I had seen in that split second of awareness was that I did, in fact, have a face right in front of me. It was touching me, just as I had dreamed. It was smelling me with its incredibly long nose. This was not a human face, though. This was a dog or a canine face, but one of the largest I had ever seen. The snout was so long that it resembled an anteater more than a dog, but the ears were definitely dog ears. Of that there could be no doubt. For a dog to be there where I was sleeping in the middle of the night seemed to indicate that he was probably feral. He might have been a family pet at one time, but he was wearing no collar, and he was roaming a wilderness area after dark, so this was basically a wild animal. I knew I was quite possibly in a great deal of danger. I tried to remain as still as I could. I tried to keep my breathing slow and steady, but it was hard. My heart was beating very quickly, and my eyes were tearing, with the hot tears burning my face and making me want to brush them away. The dog smelled the tears as well, and he licked my face to taste them. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I did nothing. I remained as still as I could, and I lay there, squinting, watching him, and trying to seem as boring as I could to that dog. And then, finally, it grew tired of me and began to look around for something else to do. At length, it rose to wander off. Only, after it had risen, it kept on rising. And rising. The dog stood up on its hind legs, its long snouted anteater head up on the top of what had to be a 6 or 7 foot tall humanoid body, covered in fur just how a dog would be. It wandered off, pushing grown trees out of its way as it passed. That wasn't a dog. That was a Dogman. Speaking of pass, I wanted to pass away on the spot. I nearly passed out. I remember it was harder to get up off the ground that night than it had ever been before. My hands were shaking so hard, it was difficult to unzip my sleeping bag. I tripped over my own feet twice getting out of that bag, and I found it so difficult to hike out of there that I eventually just sat on a rock and cried. I wept until it was all out of me, and my shakes had calmed down enough that I could walk somewhat normally again. I hiked through that night, something I would normally not do, but I needed to get home. I needed to be behind locked doors and under a roof. I needed to be someplace where I could fall asleep with the reasonable assurance that when I woke up, I wouldn't be the main subject of interest to a giant mythical carnivore. I sometimes get the desire to go out camping again. I really miss sleeping under the stars like that, I honestly do. But then, I remember why I'll never do that again. I remember the Dogman who smelled my face. Hey, it's me, Henry Lee Dogman, here to thank those of you who support all of us here at Scary Stories NYC. It really helps us if you click like and if you forward our videos or leave cool comments. If you can, it helps us even more when you let us share our 25-episode and growing collection of uncensored, scary Dogman stories with you by becoming a paid subscriber at peterbernard.com. That's right, join our monthly club and get 25 stories right off the bat, each of them wilder than what we're allowed to tell you on this channel. Then, each Sunday, get another new scary story, usually a Dogman story, but always uncensored and secret, available nowhere else on the planet. Please consider joining us today at peterbernard.com and keep the scary stories coming. Thanks, everyone.
Come back for more scary stories.